Riola, one of the co-founders of Scholarship Syria. And before I turn the Spring Speaker Series over to the lovely and capable Megan King, I want to welcome you all and thank you for coming tonight and every night. We hope you come to all of our presentations. They're going to be every week except for next week, which is spring break. And we hope that you can attend. We've got a really interesting lineup this year. But we started a year ago, and I want to thank you for helping us grow so much in the last year. It's really been more impressive than we had ever anticipated, actually, in a good way. So a year ago, Scholarship Series started with two goals in mind. The first one was to support our Syrian students and their families, and to increase community awareness of the effects that this heartbreaking, now 6-year tragedy has had on our community, on Syria, and the world. In supporting our Syrian students last year, our first goal, we're proud to say that we have raised over $8,000 for the UE Scholarship Fund. And if you're a donor, we can't thank you enough for believing in our students and for helping them finish school. In addition, the direct effect of the business communities offering internships and jobs to a number of our Syrian students is a big part of this support, as our students are on partial scholarship and many of them are helping their families. Without a current plan for their country's future, our goal is to provide them with a plan B. So thanks to Old National Bank, Fifth Third, Veterans, Shoe Carnival, Springleaf, Berry, and other local and companies in Indianapolis, Chicago, and New York. We're grateful to your help. The UE Scholarship remains open, and we actually have a link on our website, which I'm not going to click now because I don't want to be looking at you. But on our website, there is a donate link for the UE Syrian Scholarship Fund, and this money goes directly to the Student Scholarship Fund. In addition to that, Scholars for Syria is now a very small but growing nonprofit, and we have merchandise to support our efforts. We have t-shirts and posters and things that Megan will talk about later, and we also have the artist coming tonight at the end of our program, so if you want to meet the artist, we look forward to that. Okay, so our second campaign was educational awareness, and we've also been very busy in that regard as well. Thanks to the alumni parents, and some of them are here, faculty, the GAP program, the Institute of Global Enterprise, the local media, and our extraordinarily passionate and motivated team this year. We've accompanied Syrian students into at least 10 local schools this year, reaching hundreds of students in middle and high school, and opening their minds and hearts and building the kind of bridges we need to push back against a tide of xenophobia, hate, and fear. What these young middle schoolers and high schoolers realize is that after interacting with our lovely Syrians, how much we really care about the same things: food, music, soccer, sharing our culture, families, and just being human. And we have proof of that also on our website. If you see our photos or videos, our hashtag campaign, you know that it's working. We know that it's working. Just being human, my generation has tried doing this, but we didn't quite get it right. So maybe these young people, future voters, will help make a difference more than we did. Thanks to UE, the administration and faculty, and our generous speakers, thank you, David and Abby, who are giving up their time and Thursday evenings to enrich all of us. From the beginning, you've been a welcoming support platform for our work, giving a voice to our Syrian students, a safe voice, in the true spirit of the American university system. And we're grateful to you for that. And finally, to Syrians everywhere, including ours, we deeply wish none of this had ever been necessary, but we thank you for bringing your culture, your food, your families, your humor, your talent, and your potential to our country. We welcome you, we shelter you, we stand with you, and we love you. You are welcome here. Shukran. Thanks so much, Gail, for those sweet words. Hi, my name is Megan King. I am a senior here at the University of Evansville, studying international relations and French. And I'm also a member of the Scholars for Syria Executive Board. So it's with great honor that I get to be your moderator this evening. I'll try and keep those Syrians down as much as I can, any chaos that might come up. But it's with great honor that I present to you tonight our speakers. So without further ado, David Guerrettaz and Abby Seif are both attorneys who specialize in immigration and asylum. They're experts in a constantly changing world of executive order and conflict zones, offering counsel on the intricacies of the legal system and making sure the rule of law is always followed. In offering legal advocacy for their clients, David and Abby help those who have escaped persecution and war to find haven in the U.S. in order to pursue their dreams of a peaceful life that is a basic human life. David is an Evansville attorney specializing in immigration with the firm, excuse me if I butcher these names, Zimers, Stamen, Wetzel, and Shoulders. How did I do?
I'm not the only one who has a problem with his last name. I'll tell my partners that. Zimmer, Stamen, Wetzel, and Shoulders. You're close.
Thank you very much, David. That was good cue. And he's also a teacher here at the University of Evansville, part-time as business law. And Abby is in Indianapolis, who is specializing in immigration and asylum, and she is with the firm, also Abby, if you hear me, I'm sorry with any of these names, Epstein, Cohen, Donahoe, and Seif. How did I do?
It's Epstein, Cohen, Seif, and Porter.
Okay, thank you. And she's joining us tonight virtually via WebEx. So welcome, Abby. We're glad to have you here tonight. Both have spoken previously to our Syrian students regarding these issues, and they have been good friends and supporters of the Syrian community. With the timing being as crucial as it is today, the Scholars to Syria team, as well as the UE community, is thrilled to have them present to our public to cast knowledge, as well as to dispel some of the misinformation that may be present today. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming them.
What do we do to, although it's a beautiful picture, I hate to move it, but we've got some legal things we want to talk about here. Oh, there we go. Boring here. And yes, this is going to be the David and Abby show here. I get to be live in person in front of you, and like the voice of the creator, we'll have Abby here. Abby, can you hear me okay? Oh, Abby, you there? There she is.
I can't see you. The camera's going in. I can see the
Well,
audience.
you are in better shape than this poor audience here. You don't have to see it. The director here did say I would like to raise the volume of your voice. I don't know where that is. Just, yeah, while I'm getting started here, if you wouldn't mind, because I want to make sure that people can hear her. That was a very nice introduction, and I'll tell you what, since I tend to move around a lot, I think I do have a teacher voice. As my business law students across the hall know, I'm going to put the microphone down. Now, having said that, for any of you, and I see a few familiar faces that have had me in business law across the hallway. If I couldn't stand the heat, I would not be in this legal kitchen. What do I mean? If you don't understand what I'm saying, or if you can't hear what I'm saying, or if I say something too fast, because sometimes the mouth goes quicker than the brain, you should say, I object. I mean, I do it, well, I can't hear, right? We have a court for a day, right? Okay, so I'm going to put this down here, and hopefully you'll hear me because I tend to move around and flail a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my understanding our mission to get your wonderful lecture series started. What a wonderful opportunity it is for me to be here on your opening debut program, so to speak, is to give us, or to present you with an overview of immigration law, starting out, and then getting into some details that are going on right now in our political environment, not the least of which in the big house, called the Big White House, and what's been going on. And so what I want to do, with the assistance of our creator, Ms. Abby Seif. Together, thank you. I knew this would be fun. I knew this would be fun. Together, we want to express to you some tips about how to think of immigration law, and also, I know there's a lot of clamor out there about what is going on in the world of immigration, and as the title says, and I didn't create the title, it was given to me, but how appropriately and how apt for this period of time, that is, immigration, green cards, and asylum, what's legal and what's not. We're hearing a lot of different things these days. Abby and I both have a lot of clients who come to us wondering, what's my situation now? Do I need to run? Can I stay? Are there immigration benefits available for me or not? So at the end of the program here, before we get to your panel, I will talk about some of the details of the three most notable executive orders that have been issued by the White House, which definitely have impact on what Abby and I do on a day-to-day basis, and what certainly have impact on many of our clients, very good, wonderful, talented foreign nationals. So that's what we're going to do this evening. I want to start out with, though, with just I think, is a neat little story to tell you how I got involved in immigration law some 25 years ago, and also to give you the sense about how it's moved and how it's developed within my period of doing this. The very first case I had, a client, a prospective client, called me, and he says, David, I've gone to work with an employer, and I asked him for a visa. And they said, oh, you need a visa? Well, yes, I'm going to need a visa in order to work for you. And they said, well, that's fine. We'll get you a visa. No problem at all. And he proceeded to tell me that he got the visa. Well, good. Why do you need me for? I mean, why are you calling me? Well, Mr. Guerrettaz, I think I need to show you the type of visa that I got. Well, sure, I would like to see it so we can figure out what the problem is. So, I kid you not, ladies and gentlemen, the very first visa case I had was one of these things. Don't leave home without it. True story. True story. So, I told my client, yes, we got a problem. Yes, this is not the type of visa that we want. We are going to talk a lot about the real immigration visa, and absolutely, particularly for my dear foreign national clients, many of whom you know and love, or work with, or have contact with, the visas that we're going to talk about here tonight, you too, literally, from your home country to ours, don't leave home without. When you arrive, you'll need that visa that we'll talk about, and you might need this to pay for some of the costs involved, but that's a different story. Okay, that's how I got started. I thought, well, this is going to be a fun practice, isn't it? Okay, here we are. And you move forward 25 years later, and we have a very interesting administration who is making the lives of immigration attorneys quite, well, interesting. And you'll understand more as we go through. So, to start out, ladies and gentlemen, and hopefully, as we get started, you have, like lawyers typically do, we kill a lot of trees, we have a lot of paper, we look at a lot of paper, and we have brought paper with us today. So, we have prepared for you a hard copy version of our PowerPoint this evening. Some of you, though, may not got the full price tag, so you may have it either in the nice pink or plastic rather, plastic folder, or just staple. But we'd like for you to have that, take that with you when you go, not the least of which are the last two pages, but we'll talk about that later. In addition to that, we have some handouts that my co-presenter, our creator above us, Ms. Abby Seif, will take you through a fact sheet and a document pertaining to temporary protected status, particularly for those good people from Syria. So if you have those materials in front of you, I think you'll find that helpful as we go through. All right, let's go on as I typically do. I have a little bit of experience here in this building, although I was asking earlier today, I was asking someone, where is SOBA 162? I've taught for over 20 years. Well, it's not been 20 years this building has been here, but here at campus at U of B I've been here. But teaching business law for the past several years ago across the hall at SB 170. And I'm part here tonight. It's a nice classroom across the hall with SB 162. Here we are. Not having been in class, I'm not entirely sure I know how to work the toys here, but let's play and see what we do.
I'll look at that. Okay. I don't know, I think that black box up there, that may be something that we need to have here because of Abby and outer space. So if that gets in the way of some language, we want to see it, perhaps I can move it around. Ladies and gentlemen, as we get into this world called immigration, and before we get into some particular details and issues that are confronting us today, I want to do an overview of this thing called immigration law. And one of the first things I want to talk about is this distinction between the visa, not the one that Dave Ramsey doesn't much care for because of all the debt he creates, the immigration visa and status. These are two very key concepts that have a lot of intricacy and can cause some problems in our immigration world. All visas, ladies and gentlemen, are divided into two categories. We're going to talk to you tonight about those. First, immigrant, and secondly, non-immigrant. Common non-immigrant visas of the non-immigrant type are those which many of our foreign national students, some of whom are here with us tonight, have right now. It's called F1. That is a non-immigrant visa, which means those individuals benefiting from that type of visa are able to come here to the United States and live and study at one of our universities or colleges. That's a typical type of non-immigrant visa. These visas, though, as this bullet says, does not lead to lawful permanent immigrant status. It does not do that. We have visa versus status. Next I want to talk about. A visa allows the foreign national to enter the United States, whereas status allows the foreign national to stay here. The visa can be short-term, long-term, or in fact, I'm getting ahead of myself. When I think about a visa, I tell people it's a way to get here. It allows you to enter. But once you're here, you have status, and that then allows you to stay. And when you're here, we're not so concerned about the visa anymore, which typically is stamped in a passport. You have the visa, it lets you get into the country. Once you're here, I tell my clients, don't throw the passport away. But you don't really need it anymore while you're here. Keep it close, keep it in a bedside or a desk drawer somewhere. Should you decide or determine you must leave later and try to come back in. But while you're here, you want to maintain status. Status allows you to stay in the United States, as I mentioned, either short-term, long-term, or indefinitely. Lawful permanent resident status. These are the people that have what we call the green card. That's probably a term of art you've heard many times. It is lawful permanent resident status. It is a lot different than the non-immigrant visa and or status, which allows you only to be here for a short period of time. And some of the key characteristics with the lawful permanent resident status of the green card are these in front of us. They do not need employment authorization to work. You have it already as a lawful permanent resident. They're eligible for unrestricted Social Security numbers. Such may travel in and out of the United States as they please. And in order to receive an immigrant visa or status, the immigrant must be the beneficiary of a petition filed by a USC. USC, an acronym, stands for United States Citizen. We in the immigration world, by the way, as you may see through these PowerPoints, we talk in acronyms. When I first got into this business, I thought I was learning a different language. And to a certain extent, we are. But the LPR, green card, USC, United States Citizen, in order, this last bullet, to receive that immigrant visa or status, to be here permanently, the immigrant, the person coming to the United States, must be the beneficiary of a petition filed by a USC or an LPR, which is a lawful permanent resident, family member, green card holder, or an employer, or as Abby, the creator above, as she will talk to us, Asylum. We have a lot of individuals here leaving, I should say, fleeing their country. Many of you will learn more about, talk more about tonight, those suffering in the Syrian conflict, refugees, and asylees. That's another way, of course, to see immigrant permanent status in the United States. Now, with regard to getting the permanent green card, there are two ways generally by which you do this. One way is through a family sponsor. The other way is through an employer sponsor. The key message here, ladies and gentlemen, is most people who want to come to the United States to live here and or work here need a sponsor. They're not doing this on their own. They've got people inside the country that want them here. I think it's a good perspective to keep in mind as we look at this. If we're on the, or when we're on the family side, and I'll talk about employment side as well, family-based immigration divides immigrant visas and status into two other further categories, either immediate relatives and or those who fall into a priority system, which is organized by this thing called, and it is somewhat complex and it isn't very exciting, but it's a document and a tool that we immigration practitioners have to rely upon. It's called the Visa Bulletin. Now, immediate relative petitions. Who are these? Who are immediate relatives versus priority? Let's look at it. Immediate relative petitions are those filed by a USC, United States citizen, for his or her parent, spouse, or child. If you are a United States citizen in this country, we have set up our immigration program, so to speak, as a benefit to you. You may have a parent. You're a United States citizen here, but you have a parent back in a foreign country, and you want to sponsor that parent. That's he or she, mom or dad, is an immediate relative. You may have a spouse. When you traveled overseas, you went and got married. And you want to, of course, bring your spouse to live with you in peace evermore, right? Of course. We have an immigration system that's set up to benefit you so that you may sponsor an immediate relative to come in. Also, child. You may have a child. Now, under immigration law, a child is not, we think in Indiana, children are those under the age of 18. Immigration, you get 3 more years. It's 21. 21 and under. So you may have a child. Perhaps you conceive a child overseas. Who knows what the circumstances are? Ladies and gentlemen, I see all sorts of circumstances in my business. But these types of individuals are United States citizens. What is particularly important about these category of individuals is they can sponsor them and get them here immediately. I put that quotation mark, immediately. We're talking about the government. We've got a process, of course, that's going on here. But much more quickly than if you are a lawful permanent resident. If you are someone who's obtained a green card here in the United States, that's good, of course. Many of my clients, the primary objective that they're looking for, despite the rhetoric we hear on the news, particularly during the past campaign, they're not looking for a pathway to get automatically to citizenship or quickly to citizenship. They're looking for a way to have lawful permanent resident status, green card. Which is interesting if you've been keeping up with the ever-changing news, which seems to change particularly with what's going on in D.C. almost by the minute. What I am particularly attracted to hearing is our president did say, shortly before he did the State of the Union, that he's considering sending a bill to Congress which suggests that there's a path for those who are here undocumented, who have legal issues, can find a way to get the green card. Not all the way to citizenship, just the green card. That, I believe, ladies and gentlemen, would be a great, great benefit to what, as you will see, another message I hope you'll glean from this is why our immigration system is broken and why it needs reform, which, by the way, a few points during this presentation tonight, you'll see in blood red, I've got the R. That's my symbol to point out to you, this is an area of immigration law that is in desperate need of reform. Again, as I mentioned before, and as you're already starting to see, immigration law is intricate, it is detailed, it is complex, but when you get away from all these details for a moment and realize it is a nice and good, productive, can be, and also constructive system of benefiting immigration to this country. But it has gotten all wound up into a tight, mangled ball, and so many different people are looking at different things and have so many different interpretations of these rules, things get complicated. So again, we want to give you some of the fundamentals, and as we're doing so, show you where some of the big problems lie. So going back to this second category of immigrant visas based on family. I mentioned United States citizens. They can get their family members here quickly, immediately. That's why they're called immediate relatives. Okay, yeah, right. This other program is based on this preference system. Preference system involves those who are not United States citizens. We have 4 categories of those. They are unmarried children of a United States citizen. So if you have an unmarried child, now that's someone over the age of 21 who's not married. If you have an unmarried child, you can sponsor that person, but it's going to take a while, maybe years. It may take a long time. Spouses and children of the LPR, green card holder, number 2. Number 3, adults, unmarried children of the LPR. Going down, married children of the United States citizen. Finally, brothers and sisters of United States citizens. Message here is that these are the types of individuals that if you want to sponsor them, or if you fit this category to sponsor them, notice up above, I've given number. FP stands for family base. On an annual base, I mean, think of the world. Think of all the countries across the world. Our United States immigration system says if you want to sponsor someone in these categories, annually, our immigration service only allows into our country 226,000. And think of the millions of people, and think about that number for a little bit. You can get the sense that's really small. And further, that 226,000 is to be divided equally among all of the countries of the world. So, and we have a visa bulletin then, that's like a grid. It lays out how we divide these people, these categories. They're all in the queue. And we've got 4 primarily: China, India, Philippines, and Mexico. Those are the 4 areas of the globe that we say are oversubscribed. Those are huge countries from which we receive most of the applications for resident status. And then we have the 5th category. It's the rest of the world, all the other countries. And that is divided. And yes, I've got a question from the floor already. She's being very nice. She hasn't objected. She just got the hand on. Go ahead, man.
I
Yes.
wasn't going to object because I didn't disagree, but I just wanted you to recite the 4 countries again.
China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. And the 5th category is the rest of the world, all the other countries combined. And that's on the family base. We have that same division of countries on the employment base. I'll talk about that in a moment. But recently we see, and I think this is right, Abby, correct me if I get this wrong, they've added another country, El Salvador. We're seeing that. They've added that. But the message here, ladies and gentlemen, is this amount each year, we have long, long waiting lists, waiting lines, particularly those from the Philippines. If you are a Philippine person who has a green card here, and you, of course, or may very well want to sponsor your mom or your dad or your brother, it may be 20 years. We're not talking years, we're talking decades. So, for all intents and purposes, for someone who's here legally, who's gone through the immigration process correctly, the immigration system, the legal immigration system, says you have to wait maybe decades. We need reform on that. We need reform on that. Lawful permanent residency, moving on. There are 2 ways, just to give you a sense about what you do when you want to obtain the green card. You either do it through a thing or a process called adjustment of status or consular processing. What's the message here? The message here is, and it's a message many of my clients are all too interested to learn about, is this. They say, Guerrettaz. If I want to sponsor someone to come here to the United States, to live here with me, family member, someone close to me, I hope that I can do it, and I hope they can process their case right here in the United States. You know, we hate to have to go out of the country and deal with the little consulate office in our home country. But in many cases, we have to go outside the United States, and we have to process in the consulate in the home country, and that's called consular processing. So first question we have to decide is, can the person adjust status, meaning change whatever temporary, maybe they're a student, F1, maybe they're a tourist is a B2. Maybe you've got some temporary status, but you want to change that or adjust it to the green card. You want to live here permanently. Many times, we have to look at the question, can you do it here, adjustment of status, or can you consular process? Big question. Consular process overseas. After the visa has been approved, the individual travels to the United States and is admitted for a lawful permanent resident. You can imagine that process, and how lengthy it is, and how expensive it is. Ladies and gentlemen, to give you an idea on the expense, I represent a lot of men and women who, while his or her fiance is here touring the country, they wed in matrimony. Maybe they were here, they're here as graduate students and they get married, and they want to then apply for the green card. Very normal, very natural process, well within our immigration law. And before we talk about my fee and how much it costs for Guerrettaz to be involved with it, I say to them, well, the filing fee to sponsor through the adjustment of status process, just the filing fee alone, what Uncle Sam gets, $1,700. Just the filing fee alone. Now, we're not talking about Guerrettaz's fees or legal fees on top of that. And we're not talking about any travel fees that may be incurred as well. Very expensive process. Wait till you hear about what happens on the employment side, to get your green card through the employer. Very rigorous, very tough. And there are, ladies and gentlemen, fortunately, our practices, I'm sure I speak on behalf of Abby as well, we are very busy. That's a good thing. We want to be busy, of course. The point here is there are people that are willing to pay that. But it shows the investment that these good, law-abiding, and again, I'm here talking about legal immigration, not illegal immigration, legal immigration. That's what we do. They are here and they're ready to invest that much and the attorney fees to enjoy what we have, and to enjoy what many of you may know. And I'll say this: I have two of my heroes, my young son, whose significant other is in the last row of this audience here. My son Austin's in the Marine Corps, and he is deployed right now, and he's fighting for our country. And many of us have loved ones in the military, but he's fighting for what we all take so much for granted. And I represent so many people that want to be a part of this great institution called the United States of America. So I always have to.
Can we have her raise her hand?
I'm sorry? Oh, God.
Did you say his wife is here?
Not his wife, his significant other, right there. Would you please stand up? I know she's going to be here. Miranda Pepe. She and my son's parents are, have a tough time right now, but we're doing all right. We're doing all right. And Austin was leaving, and we opened it, and I did have a chance to speak with him just a couple days ago. Doing fine. Thank you for that. And welcome, Miranda. Well, sweet surprise for me. Adjustment of status then. U.S. citizenship and immigration service uses, which let me just give you a little trivia detail. When the towers went down on 9/11, so did the INS, or shortly thereafter. The immigration service, I did practice immigration law for those of us that remember life pre-9/11. That's what I fondly refer to as the golden age of immigration. There are things I got through the immigration service then that I know there's no way I can get through now. That we had then what was called the INS. The INS went down, totally refigured, restructured, and now we have this entity called, which keeps me up late at night many times, USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. It determines whether the individual is eligible for an immigrant visa in this country or whether they got to go out. And because oftentimes I tend to argue with the USCIS about whether we have to do this or that. Part of what we do in legal advocacy for our wonderful immigration clients. I'll leave this for your reading pleasure. There's a bunch of other things we want to get into, and we're already half past the hour, and I've not got to Asylum yet. Basically, when you see these pages here talking about adjusting the status and consular processing, there's not going to be a quiz, but when you do have some time to thumb through it, again, this will show you the complexity of our immigration system, much of which is in need of immigration reform, because it's just getting too complex and too out of hand. I want to skip, move back to one step. Before being admitted to the United States, and I make this next point, in the context of we hear so much about the broken immigration system, and a lot of which I will agree with, but we hear so much about how, people of ill repute and would-be criminals and that are are getting in. Ladies and gentlemen, we have on our law books, we have a very rigorous process by which those who examine foreign nationals coming into this country apply to determine whether or not they get in. Even if you do all the things that Guerrettaz has been preaching about up to this slide correctly, you still have to go meet an officer called a CBP officer, whom I often refer to as Rambo Cop. It's Customs and Border Protection. It's the officer you meet, badged officer, man or woman, that's kind of scary, kind of daunting, intimidating men and women, but doing their job. They are the final gatekeepers as to whether individuals from other countries come in, irrespective of what Guerrettaz, the immigration lawyer, did for them back behind the scenes. There are many grounds of what we call inadmissibility. Lawyers, we like to call them big, long legalese, right? Well, there's a big one for you. Inadmissibility. It means you're not admissible. You don't get to come into the country. Why? Because you may be subject to one of these. And there are 2 pages. I'm not going to bore us by reading all of them, but there could be health-related grounds. They're going to check you out medically. If you are involved in any sort of crime, there's a serious investigation into criminal background. National security. There is an examination of these individuals, whether there's any sort of national security threat behind the scenes. Are they going to become a public charge? Is our country going to have to pay for them when they're here? That's also a way to be inadmissible, which says, get back on the plane, we're sending you back. You're not coming in, we're not letting you in. Also, if you are coming in illegally, meaning you haven't done the process correctly, you've not followed this intricate series of immigration laws that Guerrettaz is summarizing, and goes on and on and on. Unlawful presence, though, is the big one here at the end, and this is the one I deal with most. Individuals, men and women, and you hear about this, the 11 million, well, what we often hear, particularly in the campaign, is the 11 million illegal immigrants. Well, not really, no. No one's illegal until an immigration judge puts that gavel back and says, okay, you're illegal, you must be deported. Everyone in the United States, all persons, not just citizens, not just green card holders, not those with non-immigrant visas, but everyone, so says the 14th Amendment of our Constitution, have the right to due process. That's one of the benefits of our Constitution, the longest living, breathing legal document governing a society in the world. It says that in the 14th Amendment, all persons are entitled to due process. So, again, you hear the advocacy coming out, as the immigration lawyer does. Those that are here, many do come in. We are aware, of course. Mexico is a major country, a producer, if you will, of those coming in that do not have any status at all and have no visa. They didn't get a visa to come in. They don't have visa. They don't have status while they're here. Are they therefore illegal? I know that is a common rhetoric that they are. But ladies and gentlemen, I have, pursuant to our immigration law, I have represented many Mexican men and women who are now green card holders when they started out with unlawful presence, meaning they were present in the United States without status. And that is illegal, it can be, but there might be a reason. There may be something we can do about that, some relief. And oftentimes immigration judges, I know Abby appears many times before an immigration judge, I do not as much as her, where we make this argument. But this can also turn out to be a trap for many people. Sometimes it's a trap for many people, and we run into problems with it. Again, immigration reform. Real quickly, I have a series of slides coming your way on employment-based immigration. What I want to do is I'm just going to summarize this so that we can get to Abby's part about asylum, so you can get to some of these other handouts that we have. Plus, I want to also get into these executive orders that our president has issued, making life interesting these days, which also gets, I think, more to the question about what's legal right now in terms of immigration. It can be very confusing. Immigration status. This slide is a segue into employment law, employment immigration law. I tell all my clients when they come to me and they're confused and they don't know whether they have relief available, and I say to them, before we can figure out your immigration issue, we first need to identify what status you have. All of us, ladies and gentlemen, everyone in this room, myself included, has an immigration status. United States citizen, that is. You know, you're proud about it, you have immigration status. A United States citizen. It is a top rung, of course. Immigrant, those with lawful permanent resident status, the green card holders. Number 2. Number 3, non-immigrant. My students from other countries here, F1s, tourists, B2s. Those are here on a temporary work visa or status, H-1B. Incidentally, there's a corresponding non-immigrant visa to virtually every letter of our alphabet. We have L visas, we have M visas, we have TN visas, we have a V, we have this, I don't think we have Z yet, or W. We're getting close, we're getting close. Anyway, non-immigrant, temporary, 30 days to 7 years, many different types. And yes, we have 2 different types of unauthorized visa statuses. And that type, depending on the type, will affect what immigration service we can provide. Overstay. Overstay means you were here on a B2 or an L1 or an H, but you didn't go when your status expired. If you are a foreign national and you have married a United States citizen and you originally came in as a B2, but then you waited and waited, overstay. Pursuant to our immigration law, done right, you can get a green card and become a citizen of this country. One of the neatest examples, I think, is a wonderful young man who had dual citizenship from India and Portugal. And I remember him specifically because one of the first things he showed me out of his wallet, and he didn't pull a visa out of his wallet, he pulled out a very lovely photograph of Mother Teresa and him standing together where she died. A wonderful young man. He came into the United States as a tourist the day before 9/11. When the towers went down, he got scared and he stayed. He never went back. He saw me a couple years later and wanted to see if he could get status. And I said, well, sir, you are an overstay. You see, he had status, and but he had nothing at the time he came to see me. And I said, you know, as a lawyer, oftentimes we get called a lot of names. But one name that sometimes I'm called in the immigration world is matchmaker. I said, sir, if you can find a lovely United States citizen bride, come and see me the day after matrimony. A year later, he comes back. He has his bride. To this day, ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to say he is a naturalized United States citizen. In fact, he called me on the phone and said, David, I just wanted to let you know I left my naturalization ceremony, and he's a citizen. He did it completely, legally, all the way through the process. We do have a program that allows him to do this, and it's a good program, but it does need reform. All right, moving on. Employment-based immigration, ladies and gentlemen. I've got a lot of slides, as I mentioned, about that. Basically, what I wanted to say, I'm going to skip to this slide, which talks about the steps. Most of the college students follow this route to get to the green card, in that they start as a college student, that's the F1, and then their next step is they go get work, they become employed, they work for a private employer or a public employer, either what's called CPT status, which means they can work while they're in school, or upon graduation, they can then go into this thing called OPT after graduation. That's optional practical training. We let them work for a year upon graduation. That's great, wonderful. If you're in the STEM program, science, technology, I like to say environmental, it's not. Engineering and mathematics, one of those areas, then you can actually work for a year and a half. Longer than a year. So this is all within our immigration law. It's a great way to develop your career here in the United States from graduation from college. Then you go into this thing called H-1B. That's a non-immigrant visa. Lets you live and work for a short period of time. You still don't have a green card though. But you want the green card, and now your employer wants you to have a green card because why? That employer has invested in you. That employer has spent a lot of money for you. Recently, one of the main areas of immigration reform, and yours truly has been on Capitol Hill lobbying for this specifically. H-1B is a very important non-immigrant visa. It's a non-immigrant visa where we educate all these wonderful minds from around the world. Well, of course, we want to put those minds to work. We want to employ them, right? We employ them through the H-1B program. Problem is, our United States government only allows on an annual basis 65,000. That's it. Last year, over 200,000 petitions were filed. I was among some of those. What does the program do now? The program, it actually takes those petitions, throws them in a lottery. picks them out at random. So I represent a lot of employers who will spend over $5,000 per employee just on filing fees. Just on filing fees. Nothing. In order to sponsor a wonderful foreign worker who's been educated in this country and who has spent some time with that employer through the CPT or the OPT program, they invest, they want that employee here, but they can't get that employee here. Why? Because the demand far exceeds the supply, and so they're put into this hopper and randomly selected. And so only 1/3 of my petitions were accepted last year, 2/3 get rejected, they send it back, and I have to send it back to the employer. And the employer has done everything correctly, paid all the money, but yet can't get an H-1B visa. Very much desperate need of immigration reform. And we've not even started with the immigration process. Yes, ma'am?
So who is in charge of keeping that cap? And why, is that like a 30 years ago, they put that number up there and it just hasn't been adjusted? And who passes that? Is this Congress? Is this?
Yes, it's a congressional law, absolutely, yes. And there was a law that sunset during the Clinton administration. We actually had, I believe it was double, 120,000. But that law sunset, and it went back to 65. They passed a law saying, hey, we want more. They let it, so they grew it up and then went back down. And it has not grown at all. And there is a lot of rhetoric, I know. The claim is those in the H-1B program are shutting American workers out of a job. I don't know a single employer, and I represent many in Evansville, that would prefer to spend so much money on one employee to get them the H-1B if they knew they had an American worker that could do the job. I mean, it's cost benefit, right? It's a lot of money. But they are willing because of the need. We have a lot of employment need right here in our community, thankfully, and we're proud of it. But many employers suffer from this. I have one company that has tried, now we're going on the 3rd year, to get an engineer from India here. The past 2 years, they did everything right, paid all the fees, filled out all the forms correctly, we had all the supporting documentation, not picked 2 years ago, and not picked last year. Are you going to try again? I guess we're going to try again.
Does that person have to go back to India then?
That person's still sitting in India. They're wanting to get that person here. That's right. Trying to get that person here. Can't. You know, and it's and this company needs that person for the particular industry that they're doing. All right, moving on. A bunch of this is about how to become a permanent resident through the employment program. You can see how complex. But I want to turn this over to our creator now, so we get to another area of immigration benefit, and that is asylum. Abby, have we bored you to tears yet?
No, I actually learned a lot about employment dates there. I was just floored. But first of all, I think we should have a round of applause for David, because that's one of the best fundamentals in an hour seminar I can tell you, I remember flying out to Seattle when I first started in immigration to go to a fundamentals seminar, and it was, I think, a 3 or 4 day seminar that probably didn't cover as thoroughly family law and employment based as David just did. More or less get into asylum and everything else that we're going to get into. So I think when David said that immigration is very complicated, I chuckled because I recently just had a conversation with my father about it, who has different political views than I do. And he just threw that out there in the middle of a conversation. He said, well, you know, immigration is very complicated. And I said, really? Shocked to hear that. So it is extremely complicated. It changes on a daily basis. And clearly with this administration, it's going to change a lot. But I think one of the good things that's come out of everything that's happened in the last month is the U.S. citizens' awareness at how much power one person can have, and how many checks on that power there are, and where they are, and how they work. And I think that with what has all gone on here with these executive orders and immigration, the checks and balances on our government are being tested, but I think that they are working. And I think that you're seeing judges, federal judges, excellent judges from around the country, uniting in their response to some of these executive orders. And I think, I didn't hear the statement from Trump that he sounded like, that David said earlier in the program, that it looked like Trump might be moving off of his stance on some of this. I didn't hear that. I did read word for word his statement to Congress, and I think that there definitely was some language in there that differed greatly from what he had said earlier in the year. And I think that that's positive for those of us that are friends of immigrants. So what I have handed out to you may seem outdated, and I figured that one of the first things that everybody's going to look at when they look at my fact sheet that I gave you is like, wow, this is from 2009. Can't possibly still be applicable after Trump took power. But in fact, it is. The good news about what's been served up to us here recently has not yet affected asylum. And I have spoken with the head of the asylum office in Chicago. As David knows, we brought him to a seminar, and we both got to sit next to him and ask him questions. And he spoke to our room full of lawyers for over an hour, and basically reassured me that most things have not changed in asylum and that he hasn't gotten any new directives. So if that's the case, I think most of you are saying, but wait, he issued this whole executive order on refugees. How could that not affect asylum? And that is because there is a difference between asylum and refugee status. And I don't know from this audience, and I just have a very little picture of you, and I'm going to try to make, okay, I just made it bigger on my computer. I don't know how many of you are familiar with asylum, refugee, and TPS. So if you can, I'm not going to ask you to give me the definition, but if you know the difference between a refugee and asylee, please raise your hand, just so I have an idea of the room I'm speaking to. So it looks to me like in this room, there's only maybe 3 people that know the difference between an asylee and a refugee. Okay, so let me explain it to you then. An asylee is somebody who comes to the United States asking for protection, asking for shelter. And they have to prove basically 5 things: that they have a well-founded fear of persecution based on a protected class. So based on politics, religion, national origin, membership in a particular social group, that nowhere in their country is safe, and that their government is either unable or unwilling to protect them, okay? So those are the basic things that an asylee is coming in and trying to prove. A refugee is doing the same thing under the exact same statute. The difference is where they're standing, okay? If they are standing inside the borders of the United States, they can file for asylum. If they are standing outside, they must go through the refugee process. The 2 processes are extremely different. Even though the exact same standard is being proven by the applicant, or the person who's coming forward, in asylum, they're here, they're processed while they're here. The majority, major majority of them are processed while they're free here in the United States. And the refugees have to go through an incredible amount of scrutiny, and they are processed a lot of times through the United Nations, through the refugee program. So if you look at the first 3 pages of the handout that I gave you, that's basically explaining it. Okay, so on page 2, down there, the differences between asylum and refugee, that's basically telling you what I just said. So what I do, primarily on my immigration side of my practice, is asylum. I think earlier I was introduced as a specialist, and I get a little nervous with that term because I do other things other than immigration. So I do personal injury, I do criminal defense. And what you'll find, and what I found, is that the clients overlap. You know, we're talking about human beings, right? So they have all different problems. But when it comes to immigration, obviously my heart is in the asylum work, and that's what I do the most. So one of the things that people need to know about asylum, if they're thinking about filing asylum, is that they have to file within the first year of arriving here in the United States. So there is a count, 365-day count from the day that you enter. What a lot of people don't understand is that there are also a lot of exceptions to that rule. Okay, so there's two big kind of categories of exceptions, which is one, change in country conditions, or two, extreme hardship, or an exceptional circumstance, okay? So if you hear those terms, change in country conditions or exceptional circumstances, most people don't think I've been in legal status as an exception, and it is, okay? So one of the things that I think that it's real important to get out there to people who are even thinking about getting into the game of filing asylum or TPS is that it's, again, extremely complex. There are a lot of little rules and there are a lot of exceptions and things that people who practice in the area can advise you with. And I know that, unfortunately, there are a lot of people in communities that are leaning on non-lawyers to help them in these processes. And I think that people need to realize that the denial rate in Chicago asylum office is generally over 50%. Okay? What they don't give statistics on is what's the denial rate when they have the assistance of an attorney. And I think that if they did do that, they would find that, at least in my practice, I have found that when people come to me where they've attempted to do this by themselves, and then they hire me, I can find usually 3 or 4 or 5 things I could probably help them with early on that would have avoided the denial. The good news is there's always an appeal, okay? And there's always another avenue that we go to try to correct those errors. But I strongly suggest that if you're in a position of advising somebody who is here and thinking about staying because they are afraid to go back to their home country, that's got to be the first thing. There has to be a well-founded fear. Then I suggest that you get legal assistance. There is free legal assistance out there. Obviously, Mr. Guerrettaz and myself are not free, but it's out there. And a little bit of help can go a long way in a case like this. So the rest of the handout I gave you goes into the credible fear interviews and the reasonable fear interviews. Those are what goes on, those are the interviews that go on at the border. So I explained to you that asylum is if you're within the United States, refugees if you're without. So what about all those people that are standing there on the line, right? What do we do with all those people standing there on the line who say, I want to come in and file for asylum? Well, we do have processes for that. And they're in your handout, and they're called the credible fear and reasonable fear interviews. And they do, there's a distinction between whether you are a child or an adult in the due process that you're given. One of the fights that you're going to see that is going to go on over the next several years is how much due process are these people allowed? If they're standing within the United States, an asylee has full due process rights. Standing outside, theory is they don't have any. They're standing on the line, what are they? So there's a lot of legal arguments about that, and I think you're going to see a big fight about that coming forward. So that's what you're hearing when you're hearing a lot of discussion about what's going on at the Texas border or the southern border and all these people being put in detention facilities. These are people that have come in and have said, I want to file for asylum. I have a reasonable or credible fear of being persecuted in my home country based on a protected class, that the government's unwilling or unable to protect me, nor in my country is safe. They come in, and if they can make that credible fear, if they can explain it to an officer on the first round, then they are put in a process to go in front of an immigration judge to go into a full hearing. Some of that was discussed recently by Trump in his last statement about he felt that he threw some statistics out that I cannot confirm or deny, but he's making the argument that it seems like at the border people are able to make a pretty good credible fear argument, but then when they're going into court, it's not being flushed out, and so there's people losing their asylum claims by the time they get there. But I think there's a lot of things that aren't being said. Like, for one thing, these people are being granted credible fear interviews, released into the U.S., never told they have the right to file for asylum and that they have to do it within 1 year. So imagine how many of these people come in, think they've been granted credible fear, right? They don't know the law, and then they don't file. And then they come see an attorney a year and a half later, 2 years later. And we say, oh. And they say, but no, I was granted at the border. None of your work. You were allowed in at the border, but you still needed to file your asylum. So there's litigation going on, trying to force the government to notice all of these people when they're granted their credible fear, that they do have the right to file asylum, here's how to file asylum, here's free legal services. So, we all are trying to unite across the country to help inform so that they understand what they're up against and what they need to do, because everybody in the system is assuming that they know. And it's a legal fiction. Most of these people have no idea what their avenues are, what their options are, where they can go for help, what they need to prove, any of it. And a lot of them do have what we call a path to citizenship, or a way of processing. These are, terms of art that we throw out there, but that means they're eligible for asylum, or they're eligible for a family-based visa, or they're eligible for cancellation of removal, or they're from a country that has been granted TPS. I'm going to segue into TPS with that. I tried to do it smoothly, but not as smooth as I wanted it to go. So the other sort of humanitarian immigration benefit that our country has given is TPS. Interesting, I did a little bit of research beyond the handout that I gave you, and it's around 1990, really, that our TPS program started. And TPS means Temporary Protected Status. And the idea of the program was that, as even in 1990, we believed we were the greatest nation in the world. When we looked around and saw these other nations that were going through such horrific, either national disasters or bad times, if you will. So they started the TPS program. And the idea was to give people temporary stay here in the U.S. until their country could rebuild itself, okay? And originally in 1990, and I'm about to point this out because I think, as I said at the beginning, we have started to realize it's really important to understand who has the power to control these systems. And the one question I think that was asked of Mr. Guerrettaz was, who decides how many visas are granted in the H-1B category, and we learned today that it's Congress. Well, in 1990, when they started the temporary protected status, it was established by Congress, but it gave the Attorney General the right to decide what countries were on the TPS list, what countries would stay on the TPS list, and what countries would come off the TPS list. In March of 2003, we changed all that. And pursuant to the Homeland Security Act of 2002, they changed it to the Attorney General, from the Attorney General to the Secretary of Homeland Security. And that's where it lies right now. The Secretary of Homeland Security has full authority to determine who's on that TPS list and who's not. Who does the Secretary of Homeland Security answer to? The executive.
Trump card.
Okay, which means what?
I said the Trump card. Trump.
Exactly, right? So, Mr. Guerrettaz and I had come down and talked to the Syrian students down there at the University of Evansville on several occasions where I tried to explain to them the difference between asylum and TPS. And most of them had a pretty good understanding of TPS and were pretty comfortable with TPS. And I kept trying to explain to everybody that TPS can be pulled out from under your feet very quickly. It's a great system. It's done a tremendous amount of good for people all over the world that have come here for safe haven. Currently, right now, just for those of you that are not familiar with immigration and the temporary protected status system, there are 13 countries, I think, currently on TPS. I'll read them to you. El Salvador, Guinea, Haiti, Honduras, Liberia, Nepal, Nicaragua, Sierra Leone, Somalia, South Sudan, the Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Okay? I will tell you, it's interesting in my practice that I don't think I've ever met a client who was from one of these countries who did not know that their country was on TPS. Okay? For some reason, that information seems to get out there pretty quickly to to the immigrants, that their country's on TPS, that they can file for TPS, that they can get a work permit with for TPS. And that seems to make a lot of people feel very safe and secure. That concerns me because they're not safe and secure, at least not in the long term. There is no path to a green card, there's no path to LPR, there's no path to citizenship, and very quickly, that security, that work permit can go away, okay? So that's TPS. It is a great protection for people that are from a country that need to just stay here for a short period of time until their country can rebuild from whatever natural disaster or unfortunate circumstance that the country is going through. But if people are thinking, and most people do after they stay here for a little while, that they want to stay, then they're going to need an immigrant-based petition, okay? And that's where the asylum can come in. And that's where people need to know things like, if you've been on TPS, that can pull your time for asylum. So I've had so many clients come in and tell me, well, I didn't file within a year, I didn't think I was eligible for asylum. And then they tell me that they've had TPS, or they've been a student, or they just completed their OPT, or this and that. And that cures all of it. And then we can go forward with a straight asylum claim and no problem. So I think I've given you sort of an overview, not nearly as well as my great counsel, David Guerrettaz, did on asylum and TPS. So I really want to answer people's questions. I mean, when we come down there, normally that's how we run our show, that we just answer questions, and I think that's how people learn the most. So I can see you, at least up to the man in the red sweater with the plaid shirt.
Abby,
Everybody that is...
Abby, you can see us, we can't see you, but I want to make a point as you're wrapping up your remarks. I want to thank everybody for indulging us to kind of do this Evansville/Indianapolis presentation. This is the only way we could do it with the schedule for Abby, so I thank you for your indulgence to allow us to present Abby's voice to you in this way. She is in Indiana. Oh, yeah,
I really put on lipstick. I really thought I hit that button.
But hey, we're lawyers, not computers. I tell my IT guy, just show me the on button. Anyway, hi Abby, welcome. Good to have you here with us, both in face and sound. All right. What we want to do then, and Abby, she is, they say to us, those that give us these law licenses, that you're not supposed to call yourself an expert or a specialist unless you take a particular task. Okay, so I'm making that statement to everyone as I'm being recorded here. We're not supposed to call ourselves experts or specialists. But Abby definitely, in the state of Indiana, I currently serve as the chair of the Indiana chapter of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and we have 123 immigration attorneys in the state of Indiana. And Abby is definitely among the handful, count on my hand, one hand, of attorneys in the state of Indiana who is the go-to person for asylum, and specifically, in particular, which I think is quite appropriate for this program, Syrians. She represents a lot of Syrian individuals. She knows if there isn't anybody, any of the 123 Indiana immigration attorneys who tops, and in my position, I get to know a lot of them. Abby is your go-to. So let me just say, and I've plugged Abby before, I've got her business card, my two very end of the materials, specifically with regard to Syrian TPS, Syrian asylum. That is her bailiwick, and she is, quote unquote, it really is, honestly, the expert in this area. Don't tell the bar people and all that. I said it, okay? Let's keep that between the 36 of us, all right? Before we go to a panel discussion, Abby, you're going to stay with us, right, for the panel discussion here we're going to have here? Okay, stay right where you're at, all right. We want to get into, okay, we need immigration reform, don't we? We do, we really do. We also need to get to the panel here in a few moments. The next two slides, I just kind of throw this out to get us, to move us into the topic about, oh my, all the stuff that Abby and David have been talking about. We get the sense, we understand better than perhaps we did before, we hope. There is a need for immigration reform. A lot of the things you've been hearing, much during the campaign, and even now during the present administration, are these types of areas where we want reform. And you'll see the executive actions there in the middle. The president, to his credit, And I will say, I mean, to his credit, I definitely believe the man and his administration mean well. He certainly has surrounded himself by a lot of very well-talented, very experienced men and women. And so, through their executive actions, they're trying to make an impact. His predecessor, Barack Obama, a lot of executive actions he too passed. And DACA, some of you may be familiar with that, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a huge executive action issued by the president, the previous president. This president, a lot of people have been scared specifically about the future of DACA. This president so far has said it's safe. Okay, so that's good. Sanctuary cities. There are certain cities in the United States where those who have immigration issues, those who may have been through immigration court before, if they're within these particular cities, then the state authorities, state police, will not necessarily report them, if you will, to the immigration police, which is ICE. And that's controversial, and it is the subject of one of the executive orders I'm going to talk about here in a moment. But there's a lot of different ideas out there about how we can move towards immigration reform. What is, of course, what is our President Trump advocating? He did very much. During the campaign, there's his quote, and I think we're starting to see it. He said, he'll make Mexico pay for it. I think we're starting to see that may not quite materialize as was advocated to us. But what our president has done is he has issued 3 executive orders, one of which I'm sure you've probably heard about. The quote-unquote, and I, on behalf of the Muslim community, I'm with all due respect to the administration, I'm a bit offended by that term of art, but that's what you hear about. I have not printed out these materials because I don't want to give any more attention to that type of title. But that's in this third of the executive orders. The first 2 came down via President Trump on January 25th. 13,767, then 68, and then 69. The first one, border security, immigration enforcement improvements. That was the wall. That's the executive order pertaining to the wall. Second, the 768, enhancing public safety in the interior of the U.S. That's the one dealing with sanctuary cities and some other things we'll talk about in a moment. And the most controversial of the 3, the blank ban, is the Executive Order 13769, which was issued 2 days later by the President, entitled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States. Highly controversial. This is presently blocked. It's subject to TROs issued by out of the 9th Circuit, District Court of Washington. We also, there was another District Court out of Virginia, I believe, was the other, yes, of Alexandria, Virginia. A District Court out of Alexandria, Virginia also issued a TRO blocking the imposition of this particular executive order. The first 2, I want to talk about those briefly. There's the page. It's all there for your reading pleasure. Those are some of the highlights of the wall executive order. This one directs the building and erection of the wall along our Mexican border. It also talks about expedited removal. Abby and I, to a certain extent, deal in this area of law called removal. Removal is the area of immigration law where the immigration authorities believe this person needs to be removed. This person has done bad things, committed crimes, unlawful presence, or whatnot. There is something in our law called expedited removal, which means within the first 14 days, when you cross the border, if you're caught, an ICE officer can snare you and send you back without your 14th Amendment due process rights. You go back without any hearing before an immigration officer. This executive order tends to expand that. It's pretty controversial, and there are some lawsuits developing about it. But there's some concerns. One of the concerns you heard Abby talk about, when you come in, this credible fear. Many people do. They come in from Mexico, but they originate in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala. Abby and I have some cases right now from the country of, well, I've got one, we've had some from Colombia and Guatemala. Some bad things going down there, and people are literally fleeing for their lives. Well, when they get here, they cross the border. If the ICE officer doesn't believe they've got a credible fear, he or she has a discretion to say, bye-bye. and go, you know, but and then they're sent back to a bad place. So that's tough. That's this particular executive order. There's not been a federal court banning it or stopping it yet, and I'm not seeing where it would get stopped. But you know, there may be some questions from any of you about that. Secondly, is this enhancing public safety?
Wait, can I jump in on that? Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, go ahead. Go. Yes.
So, yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that, so when the expedited removal came into effect, and I think it's in your, it's on one of your screens there, is that it was, even when it was at first enacted, everybody kind of did it with a gasp, and everybody realized that there's going to be legal challenges to it. And the difference between, I think, the legal challenges that you're going to see to this versus the legal challenges that went to the terrorist, you know, the border bill, that I call it, all border bills, but the one that was hitting the Muslim countries, is that that one was unconstitutional on its face. You could just read it, and it was unconstitutional, and that was the challenge to it, okay? And that's why you saw states coming in and universities and other things, and they're making a challenge to just the way it was written on its face. When it comes to expedited removal, I think you're going to see more individualized cases where a client is going to be used and it's going to go all the way up to the Supreme Court for one particular person. So I just wanted to point that out, that I think the way the challenge is coming on that is going to be more individualized. And then it will become a class action versus the first one was on its face. Did I make that too complicated?
Good. Thank you. That's a very, one thing, the message here is, you know, our president, and that's one of the things he talked about in his campaign. He's coming into town to shake things up. You know, and, you know, there is some good to that. I mean, maybe, I am actually more hopeful that now than the previous administration, Abby and I, we've had these discussions before, that there is a better chance now than there was during the past 8 years for immigration reform. I think our president is getting everyone excited, right or wrong, right? Last executive order, we're going to talk about that before we close, is contributing to that. I do believe there can be some good coming out of this. The next one, 13768, this is the one dealing with sanctuary cities, and this is the one, that the point of this one that concerns a lot of immigration attorneys is there's a notion within our immigration law of prioritizing different types of illegal, so to speak, activities. You know, for instance, I have a case right now before immigration court. I represent a lady who has this unlawful presence that I talked about. She's from one of the African countries where, and this is, and we've sought, and Abby helped me with this, we've sought asylum for her based on FGM, female genital mutilation. And that goes on in a lot of tribal countries in Africa. And she is a victim of this. And so we went up and I represented her in the Chicago Immigration Court. I presented this to the judge. And because she did not meet the 1-year rule that Abby talked about for asylum, I remember standing in front of the judge, and he was quizzing me left and right, trying to figure out a way. And I said, Your Honor, I realize she doesn't meet the 1-year rule, but we still want to get her a form of asylum so she doesn't go back, which is called withholding of removal. And so the judge said, okay, Mr. Guerrettaz, we will set you for a hearing. And we were there a few months ago. The hearing's in 2020. I think I'll be available, Judge. I've got it scheduled that day in 2020. So that's, you know, it's a, yes, she's here without documentation. She is subject to a final order of removal. She's not departed, and no one has said she poses a risk to public safety at all, but she's not in, you know, the law is not really in her favor. Well, one of the reasons why she's at 2020 is because the judge says, well, your priority. I need to deal with the criminals first. Okay, right. That's good. You should, of course. What this executive order says, hey, notice I don't have these numbers 1 through 8 or 9. This is the number 1 priority down. Now the notion is, with regard to this early executive order, is, hey, all these are treated alike. So if I were to go before the immigration court now, the judge may say, hey, we're going to treat your client Guerrettaz just like I'm going to treat someone who just killed people and has a criminal record, felony on their background, or in their record, and we'll take his, we'll take yours first, we'll take his tomorrow. I don't know if that's, so the point here is, anyone who has an issue is priority, and that's causing some great controversy. And there are also cases coming down the pike against this. Now, the big one, the ban. The one that said if you're from one of the 7 countries, you're not coming in. This is the one, thanks to the state of Washington versus Trump out of the 9th Circuit, that ban, if you will, has been stalled or has been blocked by the imposition by the court of a temporary restraining order. And that temporary restraining order, which bans that particular action from going into effect, has been supported by the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, and it is currently banned, or banned. Banned is banned. Banned is banned. Well, it's not banned necessarily. It is certainly being blocked for a while. What I want to point out is there are these sections. That executive order, I've got it here if you want to read it or take a look at it, has, just like any legal piece of documentation, many paragraphs, many sections. The TRO only stops these particular sections. The section that says, for 90 days, anyone from the 7 countries, even if you have a green card, even if you're a citizen or have a status, you were banned. You couldn't come in. Remember all the news, airports, all the craziness going on? Well, that's been stopped, or stalled and blocked. Also, we have this executive order said, we're going to stop for 120 days our refugee program. That too has been blocked. Those from Syria. There was a specific one about Syria. Suspended indefinitely the entry of all Syrian refugees. Ouch. That too, blocked. And also, there's a provision that says DHS, the law enforcement individuals, ICE and whatnot, who have the ability to enforce this stuff, they could, if they want to, they could do a case-by-case analysis and decide, well, we'll let you come in or we'll let you come in. They could decide themselves, right, without due process of law, and they get to decide themselves what's in the national interest based on whether a person is of a particular minority, a religious minority in this country facing religious persecution. That's the definition of whether it's in the national interest. The federal courts have blocked that also. So those are the particular provisions that have been blocked. What I want to say, and this is the last slide we'll get to our panel, is fortunately, USIS, that agency I say keeps me up at night, has gone on record, and I've got a memorandum issued by the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, which has said, okay, everyone's getting really scared about the ban. Well, let us tell you that since we are the primary entity, if you will, that enforces immigration law and determines who gets to have an immigration benefit or not, we are here to tell you that the ban is not going to affect processing of applications already in the United States, regardless of the country of nationality. The ban does not affect processing of applications by any green card holders outside the United States. And if you are an asylee or refugee, a relative, you know, there's a process, as Abby knows. If you're a relative of an asylum applicant or someone who's benefited from asylum or the refugee program, and you want to come and join your family member, that processing will still continue. And all of the asylum cases that Abby talked about, those, regardless of the country you're from, even Syria, those will still be processed as before. So USIS did come out and say, okay, let's all, kind of calm down. We were still going to do a lot of processing. And ladies and gentlemen, that concludes, and you can see, we can talk all day, couldn't we? And I think we've got a bit over time. It was tough to get it all in, but I think now is our segue to the panel.
Yeah, so first let's just thank